Assalamu alaikum, I'm Aisha.
Assalamu alaikum, and I'm Amanda. And this is Converts Unplugged. No fluff, no holding back, just honest conversation.
Brought to you by New Beginnings, a platform that aims to support new Muslims on their journey through Islam from the Shahada and beyond.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, everybody, to the Converts Unplugged podcast. This is episode 5, mashallah, and today we are discussing coming out of the conversion closet, telling your family that you have embraced Islam. And to discuss this very important topic with us today, we are welcoming Sister Andrea and Brother AbdulMaalik.
Assalamu alaikum, Sister Andrea and Brother AbdulMaalik. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's an absolute pleasure to meet you both. Actually, AbdulMaalik and I have known each other on and off for quite a while. We've done certain projects and whatnot together, but Andrea, I've not met you. So I'm really humbled that you're here and I'm really glad to meet you. And we are so pleased. Thank you for joining us. And to talk about one of our main topics of discussion, which is incredibly important and pertinent to many converts of today.
So I'm going to start with ladies first and begin with Sister Andrea. Andrea, I've already listened to you speak about your story. You appeared on another podcast and mashallah, it was really inspirational. I have to say, I found it one of the more interesting stories on that particular series that I've heard so far. Could you share with us and the listeners, just in brief, how you found Islam? Because I believe you discovered Islam through caring for unaccompanied minor children who were Muslim, didn't you?
Salam alaikum, everybody.
Salam.
Yes, that's quite right. That is how I discovered Islam. I have been a foster carer for over 20 years, had 98 children, and have only been Muslim for 8 of those years. But as a non-Muslim, I was presented with the way it works generally is you have some children, they go through their little story, they go to wherever they're going, back to parents, hopefully, inshallah, or to adoption, whatever they're doing. And then you wait for another phone call. Now, I generally didn't do teenagers, but they asked me to have some teenagers. And I'm bearing in mind, you asked me to keep this short, so I'm doing my best. And with that, I had some Eritrean Pentecostal Christians, and then as some of them moved out, in moved some Afghan asylum-seeking young men. I say men, they were still children. They were often 10, 12, 14. And to do my job properly, I needed to learn about Islam. I never watched the news, never have done as an adult, and I don't have no negative. Actually, I knew nothing of Islam at all or Muslims. I probably wondered who those people with beards were. Often thought hijab was Mormons. Never really thought about it. Had no reason to think along those lines at all. But to look after these boys properly, they're with me as a trust. From their parents, a very, very long way away, or in fact, as complete orphans. So I would like to do that job properly. I realised religion was very important to some people. So I had to study a bit of Islam just to pop in the, the halal meat or the why do they keep running around the house with wet hands and feet? And what's wrong with going out on a Friday? Anyway, the fact is they wanted to go to the mosque. I wanted to go to Drayton Manor. I did point out if we did, if you did the mosque on Sunday, it would please everybody, including school. But hey, so anyway, so I learned about, Friday being good, etc., etc. Now, these boys were always very well behaved, well mannered, treated my daughter, who's similar age, as an absolute princess. And I thought, is it their humility? What is it that's made these young people so well mannered? We do have well mannered teenagers in our country, but it was just a complete observation. And they would tell me why they did this and why they didn't do things. And a lot of it obviously was to do with being Muslim. So I thought, as they settled into the UK and preferred the dunya lot more than their dean. I thought I need to do something more here to help these children, still as a non-Muslim. So I thought I'd just read an English version of the Quran, not with the best intentions, actually, just to get the better of them, which worked very funny, actually, on a couple of occasions, as in, around young ladies, etc. I just popped up with, aren't you supposed to be looking the other way or lowering your gaze? And they were, oh, how do you know that? And because they were such respectful, boys, they quickly got back in line, as much as they could do as young boys in the UK, bless them. And lots of examples like that. The more I read the English version of the Quran, and it, to me, matched with the morals and the way I'd like to have brought up my children without knowing Islam at all. I would like to say I always knew there was something. I didn't recognize or think that it was a God or indeed God. And then the main moment was the Inshallah moment, when a young boy who had travelled rather dangerously across Europe and on the underneath of a lorry, across the channel, etc., and up the motorways, landed on the M40, came into care into my house. Now, by this time, I'd got boys who'd been here a few years and they could speak English and Pashto, the same as the young boy that had just arrived. The way he came was very, very dangerous. So I said to the boy I had had a while, ask him, what was he thinking when he, took, the initial leap on this lorry? And the boy just turned round and went, oh, it still makes me cry now, sorry, and just went, Inshallah. And I was like, yeah, right, what? What's this Inshallah thing? Wow. I won't go into the details of the horrendous journey, but it was so horrendous to think that you just did it by going, Inshallah, which I might add I get now. I was just like, that's ridiculous. So instead of reading any more about Islam, etc., I Googled Inshallah and followed that, which takes you, for me, it seems to take you on a completely different path of spirituality, I guess. And for that absolute handhold and belief that young man had, I wanted that. I wanted that. And so events led to me taking my Shahada, and alhamdulillah, here I am now. So, but I still now, 8 years on, have my own Inshallah moments and my own, I've got that handhold. So, yes, it was amazing moment in my life. And
can I just ask, thank you for sharing that with us. I think my jaw just dropped at parts of what you were just telling me, especially when you just said that young boy was underneath the truck. My jaw just dropped.
Just like to say that's not the worst of the story.
No, I can imagine, and I don't even want to,
No, it's quite harsh. It's harsh.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you what you meant when you said that you went on a journey discovering what Inshallah meant. Like, what did it mean to you? How did that inspire you? Could you elaborate for us?
I think within my life, pre-Muslim, I would make choices. I would make bad choices, but there was never a handhold. There was never an ultimate to. I can only describe it as a Muslim now. Strangely, there was never an ultimate. That's the. Well, I suppose that there is actually, because as a non-Muslim, I always used to do my children like this. What's the bottom line? Have you done everything you've got to do? Which in our case is now tether your camel. Have you done everything? What's your bottom line? That's it. What will be, I guess I must have said, which is in fact, what Allah wills. If you see, so there's always comparisons like that in my life. And the more I read about Inshallah, and that matched up so much. But obviously, well, maybe not so obviously, that what will be actually being God. So it was just like wow. And then I think for quite some months, I not only read, so when I say I went on a journey, not only read, I just wondered if I always thought, inshallah, about these difficult moments in my life where it was a moment in my life where there was lots of changes personally. How would that be? How am I thinking? What am I doing? Obviously, I didn't know to pray or to ask or anything, although I was learning things like that. And that would, it was just, it just seeped into me. It really was just the journey to that. The spirituality, I think, was, it made it all click into place for me. And it was about, which I'm sure most people do, it's doing all you can do, and then it's up to Allah, isn't it? It's so easy, so simple. It suits me very well.
I think it's an amazing lesson that you had from that young man in just pure reliance on Allah. Like you said, what will be, tethering our camels and so on and so forth, doing everything that we can. And then after that, it's in his hands.
Yes, but as a non-Muslim, I was never in anybody's hands, I felt. But I would like to say that, all my life, and it's been very mixed and very varied, and like I said, not always made good choices or the right choices. As I look back, there was always somebody holding me, and I can even, that thing about you might not like a thing, but it'll be good for you. I can look back and I know that, you didn't like that at all. But look, you would never have been a foster carer. You would never have, all that. It's just amazing. Still amazing.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Andrea, for sharing your amazing story. I mean, I'm just so humbled listening to that, and I'm amazed as well. But thank you so much for everything you've just shared, which brings me on to my next guest. Brother AbdulMaalik Taylor from Muslim History Tours, which some people may know him better as and from. Brother, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about how you came to Islam, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name's AbdulMaalik Taylor. I used to be a practicing Hindu, and I converted more than 20 years ago. And my journey to Islam was one of where I researched actually Islam, and I did comparisons with regards to Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam. And each time when I looked at the different questions I had, searching for answers, I found that Islam had the answer. And one of the parts that I used to look at, one aspect I looked at was, for example, the concept of God, the oneness of God. And this is like, as a practicing Hindu, I was worshipping like multiple gods, deities, etc. And even when I did a religious pilgrimage to India, I was worshipping a man god called Sri Sathya Sai Baba, who was it was said that he was an incarnation of God. And one of the incarnations he had was supposed to have been Jesus, peace be upon him. So I looked at Christianity as well. Now, I went to a Church of England school, and I had religious studies. A large portion of that was Christianity. And I used to be the one who used to put up the hymn numbers in the church as well. So I had a bit of an active role within that, in the Christian faith within that school as well. But I did start to question in terms of like, why is it that the Muslims are saying that you worship one God, and Christianity was seen as you have the Trinity, and we had something similar to that within Hinduism called the Trimurti. And I looked at a historical part, which was the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, and this was when it was established, where the concept of the Trinity. And I thought to myself, okay, that's a historical fact. I don't know, maybe that's where I got my interest in terms of history from initially, researching the actual key parts. Another part which I looked at was the preservation of the language itself in its original text, if you like. And if I looked at Hinduism, I found that, the original Vedics is supposed to be in Sanskrit. But then did I know anyone who knew the Sanskrit language? Not really, except people still do it today. Is it a living language? A bit similar to Latin. Yes, there are some people who may learn it. Some people may be knowledgeable with regards to the Latin language, but is it a living language? The answer is a no. And then I looked at Arabic, and I thought to myself, Allah Subhanahu says in the Quran, He preserved its original format. And I thought, okay, then let's take a look at this Arabic part now. And lo and behold, Arabic was the language of revelation from the beginning time of Islam, and it still is a living language as well. Who knew the Quran off by heart? It could be somebody who was maybe 80 years old in America. It could be an 8-year-old in Africa. It could be, you would always find somebody who knew the Quran in its entirety. In Hinduism, no, I didn't. I never came across anyone who knew the books basically from memory. And the Bible was something similar as well. I didn't know anyone who knew the Bible from memory in its entirety. So those are some examples of where everything led to Islam. And what I found was there was more clarity in terms of the practices. It wasn't the case like in Hinduism, if you don't do it, it will be seen as being sinful, or paplag, as you say in Gujarati. And it was, if I did question some of the practices that my family members were doing, and my extended family as well, because I was the most practicing person in my family and extended family as well. I was in between a vegetarian and a vegan as well. But my family members, they could never really offer me a response. If I say to them, why do we not keep 2 broomsticks together? So it could be a broomstick from a mop and a broom. All they would say, it brings bad luck. But what was the reason behind it? How did that type of thought actually emerge? And, it brings bad luck. Nobody really had an answer. But when they looked at certain practices within Islam, we could always trace it back to the foundation of Islam, you could say. And that's what did actually make me more closer to Islam. But then I spent about a year trying to find out a little bit more and more. And I did approach my Muslim friends. I had Muslim friends, but they never really introduced me to Islam. They would take the mickey out of me for being a Hindu. They would also, if you like, abuse me with regards to some of the practices as a Hindu that I would do. But in terms of that invitation to Islam, it never really came from them. And then I started asking them questions. Could I have a copy of your Quran so I can read it? Because up until this time, I only had like some Dawah literature. I never had a copy of the Quran. And I went to my Pakistani friend's house 3 times. First time he made up an excuse. Second time he said I'll have to have a bath, and I was like, "What? Just to read the book?" I did. I think it obviously meant to do wudu or maybe even ghusl. I don't know what mindset he had. But the third time when I went round, I said, "Look, I'll have the bath or whatever. Can I just have the Quran so I can read it for myself?" And that's when he said, his mother's the most religious practicing person in the family, and the Quran's wrapped up, kept on top shelf of the bookcase, and he has to seek permission from his mother. And I thought, okay, Auntie's just next door, so why don't you go and ask her? Because no, she's got guests and everything like that. So I kind of like gathered on the third occasion. He was just making up one excuse after another. And I thought to myself, you know what? Forget it. I left disappointed and actually got my first Quran, the Abdullah Yusuf Ali Quran, from my Mauritian Hindu friend, who I had actually gone with to see on my Hindu religious pilgrimage to India. And I said to him, I'm just interested in looking at Islam. And he then said, that was my first round of like somebody verbally abusing me. And I was like, whoa, I've never seen this side of you. I go, what's the matter with you? Why are you conducting yourself like this? And he said, oh, no, these Muslims are X, Y, whatever. He had a family friend as well who had become Muslim. And he obviously then, I think they separated after that as well. But he said to me, hold on a minute. He went out of the room. He came back in and he actually threw me the Abdullah Yusuf Ali Quran. And I was like, well, okay, it's a holy book. Not the best of the ways that one would expect to that you receive a holy book, but at least I've got it now. And I started to read from the Quran. it was also the English translation, and in the 90s it was the Abdullah Yusuf English translation was with thy, thee, though, and I thought I was reading Shakespeare, to be honest. I thought I left that behind. I was thinking, what am I reading here? Another thing, what I'd just like to add, I was quite heavily dyslexic as well, and I was finding it extremely hard. I had books like I think it was by Bilal Phillips, Fundamentals of Tawheed, which was like an A5 type book, and one page of that would take me 20 minutes to read. And sometimes I would see the rivers between the words, so I would actually lose my position. That's how bad it was. And it's paralyzed, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made me persevere, basically, to keep reading the Quran despite the difficulties I had. And now, in terms of my reading, it's people wouldn't notice the difference as to I don't like to use the word normal person, because dyslexic people can be creative and artistic as well, which normal people don't really, sight of. So, that's what I started to read verses from the Quran, really settled in my heart, sort of, gosh, what the believers would be given in paradise. And I thought to myself, perhaps it's now high time that I speak to somebody who has religious knowledge. By this time, I had a Turkish friend, and I asked them, could I, speak to the someone of religious knowledge? I said, oh yeah, my parents in Ramadan go to the Turkish mosque and speak to the Hoja there. I go, what's the Hoja? It goes, the Turkish word for Imam. I thought, okay, that makes sense. So I went with the parents to the Turkish mosque, and out came the Imam. He only spoke Turkish, and I thought to myself, great, I'm not going to communicate with you. But then there was a university lecturer who came and he started translating. I think it got lost in the translation, and the Imam thought I wanted to become Muslim. And I thought I just wanted to have an open discussion with regards to Imam. But then the Imam goes, do you want to become Muslim? And just then I had a flashback moment that seemed like, well, I think it was only about 5 seconds, but, it was as if my whole life was like a new flashback. And I said, yes. So then he goes, okay, that's no problem. Then there was a discussion, so a crowd now developed around us. And he said he'll have to have a bath. And I'm thinking, what is it with this bath going on here? I'm thinking, then I can't work out. There were hand signals and saying that you have to do this, you have to put his hand over his head. And I was like, I haven't got a clue what's going on with regards to the bath situation in Islam. But as I say, later on in life, you'll find out. And then Imam said, look, he doesn't need to do any of that. He can just say the Shahada. So we went into the prayer, and I was shocked. Here I'm watching people, as I say, they were praying, but as far as I could see, they were just like, hopping up and down. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, guys, when are you guys going to finishing it? This is the Tarawih praise, or Isha and then Tarawih praise. And after the Tarawih praise, it was probably after an hour or so, I went to the front where the Imam was, and I was explaining the 5 pillars of Islam and the pillars of Iman as well. And I was asked, do you want to become Muslim? And I said, yes. So I then, said the declaration of faith for the Shahada. And from that moment onwards, I knew for some strange reason that I was going to have difficulty with my family, because unfortunately there is a lot of animosity, or you could say maybe Islamophobia in hindsight, that comes from, in my experience, from the Hindu community to the Muslims, and it's embedded, unfortunately, from their ancestors, their own, mother and fathers, as well as the wider community. And, up until this time, I've not mentioned anything to my family members about looking into Islam, and any Dawah literature I had, information about Islam, I kept towards one side. But this was in Ramadan, so I become Muslim, and I had to obviously fast. And I was waking up in the morning, having my pre-dawn meal, and I wasn't washing my dishes in the sink, and I just left them there. Unlike the year before, when I was looking into Islam, I was fasting as well as a non-Muslim, and I would wash my dishes as well, and arrive back from college after Maghrib, so nobody suspected that I was fasting. But then when I became Muslim, I was waking up, having a pre-dawn meal, leaving the dishes for some reason in in the sink. In some ways, maybe that was the opening of like how my parents found out, and that was how, in some ways, facilitating my parents to find out as well. But what happened then? I started to initially get verbal abuse from my parents, and from the verbal abuse, it became physical abuse. And some of the physical abuse that I did experience was like we had a dog, and even the chain was the lead was actually used on me as well. And was repeatedly physically attacked, so by the limbs as well. And there was a part in Islam that I was being on my social network, you could say. They were saying that you couldn't off to your parents, even though they were non-Muslims. And I thought to myself, even at this time, how is it possible that I can't even do anything in this case because it was seen as sinful, even though I'm being, physically abused here. And I did seek some advice with regards to even my prayers. Could I lie to my parents in order to do my prayers as well? So, for example, there was an occasion when my father called me, and because I was doing my prayers, I didn't respond. And I did discover that I could lie to my parents for this particular part of my Islam in terms of my prayers, because the obedience is to the Creator here and not to the created. So, but I think thankfully after that time, I don't think I did actually lie with regards to my prayers. It was just in some ways that pressure. I was thinking of like, how could I facilitate my prayers? Speaking about it, asking that question to somebody and getting a response from an imam was helpful.
Brother AbdulMaalik, thank you so much for sharing your story. And inshallah, if you don't mind, we will go a little bit more in depth into your experiences, given the topic of today's podcast. But before we move to our main discussion, could you tell the listeners a little bit more about your initiative that you run, which is Muslim History Tours?
Muslim History Tours was set up because I realized there was a lack of positive portrayal of the Muslims in Britain. If one was to type in Muslims in America, on YouTube, one would find positive stories. But then if you also looked at Australia, Muslims in Australia, you see positive stories and heritage stories, how long Muslims have been in Australia, etc. However, if one was to type in Muslims in Britain, it'd be the opposite. Totally the opposite, and it just didn't give a positive image of the Muslims in Britain. And because I had knowledge about Muslim heritage in Britain, I thought to myself, well, let's establish some workshops, Vikings and Muslims, Tudors and Muslims, Victorians and Muslims, and a normal timeline presentation as well about Muslims in Britain, the interactions they had. And that could be one way of actually providing a positive narrative, say, to the wider society. But then within a few months, I realized I could actually take these workshops to outdoor learning. And that's how it then developed into walk-in tours. It's a matter of presenting Islam or Muslims in Britain from a historical perspective in terms of the contributions.
Jazakallah khair to you both for sharing your stories and your experiences so far, which does actually lead us very nicely in today's topic of conversation, which we have actually started to touch upon, which is actually coming out of the conversion closet, announcing our Islam to family, friends and colleagues, how we deal with any negativity we may face as a result.
Because for some of us, taking Shahada can be problematic. Sometimes we face hostilities from our loved ones and people who we hold dear to us. Brother AbdulMaalik, you touched upon some of your experiences with your family, which sounded horrific, to be honest. How have you managed to deal with your family's disapproval with your conversion? Have things improved? You mentioned about making dua to have patience and so on. Have you managed to overcome these difficulties with your family at all?
To be honest, it's still ongoing. My mother passed away of coronavirus last March, and it created some challenges with my siblings where we weren't getting on with each other, and that's something that's been there historically because they always thought that I never helped out my mother, when in reality I was helping out my mother. And my mother asked me if I wouldn't mind not going round when my siblings were there because it was always causing problems. So when I spoke to them on the day my mother found out my mother died, they didn't want me to know, and I only found out through the funeral director, and I was only given snippets of what was going to take place. Unless I asked the question, it continues, and it's difficult.
How have you dealt with this disapproval? I mean, it seems to me, if you don't mind me saying, that there are pre-existing issues that your conversion to Islam has just given them an excuse to continue with. I mean, as you said, that there have always been hostilities between you and your siblings, and it seems, just from what you said, whether you had converted or not, the problems were there, but because you converted, it gave them sort of license to become even worse.
I would say, in general, before my conversion, the relationship between my siblings was better. Unfortunately, my younger one, she married into a practicing Hindu family, and they told her to cut contact with me. Looking at ex-Hindus and ex-Sikh converts, this is a common theme they have, that they are fearful of that community backlash as well. And in reality, it's not just community backlash, it's the family backlash as well, the repercussions. And I think this is what people have actually said nationwide. It's not nationwide, because I spoke to convert organizations in Malaysia and Singapore and elsewhere as well. They say when it comes to the ex-Hindu and ex-Sikh community, they seem to be suffering a lot more than white and black converts to Islam.
I think you've hit on something, the lack of support for people who convert to Islam from these two particular communities.
As we say, the brown converts.
Yes.
Most of the time we hear about stories about white and black converts, but what about the brown converts? I mean, I know what I get as well, there's a lot of people from different organizations. They always inquire, AbdulMaalik, you're quite active in the convert community. Can you suggest any converts who can perhaps give a talk? And I always say, well, what type of convert are you looking for? Because what do you mean? I go, well, I always start off with the brown converts. I do. I say, oh, no, we're not looking for an ex-Hindu or Sikh. We're looking for a white or black convert.
Yeah, no, there is definitely this
hierarchy.
There's this bizarre hierarchy, this ranking of converts according to skin color, which is deeply problematic and racist. But then there's also this sort of invisibility of the converts from Hindu and Sikh backgrounds, because you're not as visible as, say, somebody with bright blue eyes or really white skin, or somebody who's obviously Jamaican or something like that. I have sisters in our halakha who come from Sikh backgrounds, and their own families can't understand why they can't read the Quran, why they can't, why they don't know how to pray. And they've had their mothers-in-law tell them things like, well, you're Pakistani now, you're not Indian anymore, which is ridiculous. There are Indian Muslims. Why does it make a difference? SubhanAllah. And it's just, there's obviously a very deeply rooted political and historical and religious history there that needs to be unpacked and looked at. Which, of course, myself, as somebody who's come from a nominally Christian white background, I had no idea about this until a few years ago, and we do not talk about it enough. So I'm glad that you have come on and are discussing this, because I think it's really important to expose it, really, and to make the wider community more aware of it.
On that note, I think it's quite a funny story, but when I went to the masjid and met up with other sisters, funnily enough, Pakistani ladies, sisters, came to me and said, oh, have you learned how to make biryani? No. Why? And I said, you do know I've turned to be a Muslim. I haven't changed race. I'm not a Pakistani person. I'm a Muslim person. Oh, no, it makes it even worse. You will need to make it for your husband. Okay, then. Have I got a husband? And how come he's from Pakistan? And how come he likes biryani?
The idea of Muslims as being a one particular race and one particular ethnicity is something that the wider community makes an assumption about, but also the Muslim community within that community, that sub-community, makes an assumption about.
Absolutely. If I can add to that as well, I mean, I think it's definitely lack of education. Andrea, alhamdulillah, you converted, when you had these young minors around you who were obviously from Afghanistan and other areas.
Yes.
What was their reaction like, as well as your family and friends, to you taking Shahada?
Well, as it goes, the asylum-seeking young people I had back then had left my house. They'd turned 18 and they'd grown up. I still supported them. We were still all family, if you like. And my next phone call then was for English, a sibling group of small little English placements. And so I didn't have a house full of Muslims. And at the same time, I went through an amicable divorce, no problem whatsoever, just one of those midlife things, we're going on different paths, which I might add, my path wasn't to Islam then at all. It was not even in my head, not I knew of Islam, but it wasn't anything. I never thought I would take my Shahada. It wasn't a purposeful thing like that. So I looked after, the lovely children that I had, and my own children at this time had left for university. So I've the husband's gone, the children have gone, the Muslimness has gone out of my house, but I still loved my job, still enjoyed doing it. And it was, it really was a very personal thing. It was me on this journey, me researching, me thinking and doing. And I went to a dawah table and explained my lifestyle and how I wanted more leaflets or whatever to read. And they I don't suppose it was jokingly, really. It couldn't have been really, because they said I was doing absolutely everything a Muslim should be doing, as in my job, etc., etc. But I was getting no reward for it. And I, to be quite honest, by this time I'd learnt that there was only one God. And I'd learnt about the Prophet, peace be upon him, that he was the last messenger, and I took that on board. And those were the two things of the Shahada, weren't they? So then they said I was doing all good things and not getting rewards. So almost like, I don't know, a shop or a store reward card. I thought, a bit like Inshallah, really. Ooh, what's that? Oh, let's have some rewards. They're always good, aren't they? A good voucher. So I thought, okay then. And I did believe what I'm saying. Joking aside, I did believe. Funny enough, the boys had also taught me, the Pentecostal boys and the Afghan boys, one read the Bible and found great comfort from that, and the Muslim boys went to the mosque. And one day I said to them, okay, you two, which God's the best? And oh yes, and they both went, oh, Andrea, there's only one God. Both of them in unison said that. And I was like, I'd seen God in action, if you like, with the Christian boy and with the Muslim boy. And I believe that as they said it to me, I thought, oh yeah, that works. That works much better with me. Sits so well with me there to be one God. So I'd learned all those things, and I took my Shahada at the dawah table. I told my Afghan boys who had left, who were grown men then, and they all cried, and over the years have come back onto their deen, which is just so good. And then my trick was, don't tell anybody. Snook around doing your prayers. You don't have to wear your scarf yet. So, and then in a year's time, I will say, oh, actually, I'm Muslim. They'll all go, oh no. And I'll go, but I have been for a year. So ha ha. That was my plan. It never went like that at all. Never went like that at all. And I had my own children were adults, and a lovely Reva friend of mine said, have you got a will? And I said, oh yeah, I have got one. And they said, and has it got anything about how you're going to be married? No. Okay. I'm thinking, and she went, you better put that in your will. So I did go to a solicitor and just change that. So the first line of my will says, please bury me according to Islamic custom, because of course nobody knew I was a Muslim. So and my daughter arrived, thought the will on the side would tell her what she'd be inheriting, and she opened the will. And very absolutely, alhamdulillah, all three adult children who don't live in my house were in my house, which anybody of adult children will know, unless you organise it, that very rarely happens. And there all three of them were. There she was, reading the top line off the wheel. I knew it. She said, I knew you'd do that. I knew you were Muslim. So I called the boys in and they were like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you've always loved it. You've always loved looking after those boys. That was it. Those are the, so lovely. So lovely. I was so pleased. And my dad, I'd visit, and in Ramadan, wasn't eating again. And my dad went, you carry on like this, I think one day you might convert. And I was literally going out the door and I went, actually, Dad, I already have. And he just went, oh, okay. Oh, we'll have to have a longer chat about that next time. And I was like, oh, alhamdulillah. So yeah, all worked really, really well. It was very, 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 very good. Actually, the only thing that brushed me up the wrong way was, I don't know how I say that. Perhaps you can edit it for me. How the people I work for, once I wore scarf, when I went to panel to be approved, like we do each year as foster carers, they didn't approve me and came back and asked for an explanation as to why I've decided to show my faith so openly. Ooh, rubbed me up slightly the wrong way. It got through. Obviously, I'm still a foster carer. It was fine. Never got any derogatory comments back. But before I sent my response, I did get a brother who was a solicitor on board and just say, is that okay, what I've written? Because I just thought, oh, hang on, it's going to get all political. And it's just, I'm looking after children. There's no politics in it. It doesn't matter what religion I am. So,
alhamdulillah, your story sounds so very positive, mashallah, tabarakallah. Some really lovely moments as well.
Yeah, they are.
Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, they were.
Just to point out as well what you said about the will, actually. Inshallah, we are hoping to touch upon this in a future podcast. But I just wanted to make it clear, yes, not many convert Muslims know that this is something that they should really, they should be thinking about as soon as possible. Reminder to myself, and to make sure that they are, when their demise happens, that they should be buried as Muslims. So that's something for the listeners to think about.
Jazakallah khair for pointing that out, Aisha, because I think that is really important. And yes, inshallah, we will be covering it later, how to go about it. Now, Andrea's experience has been very positive, mashallah. Brother AbdulMaalik's experience has been very challenging, subhanallah. But we do hear stories from converts that run the gamut of from very positive stories where everybody is very accepting, and even, subhanallah, some people have their parents become Muslim, and may Allah give all of our families hidayah, right down to the opposite, death threats and so on. But I would like to ask our guests, we do have brothers and sisters whose family disown them, who end up in very dire situations because of what happens. Other than, obviously we make dua for these brothers and sisters. We want Allah to soften their families' hearts. But what else can we do as new Muslims to show our families that, we aren't brainwashed? We're still their sons and daughters. We're still their brothers and sisters. From your experience, do you have any advice to new Muslims who are experiencing this extreme negativity from their families? Perhaps Brother AbdulMaalik, if you want to start us off.
I think when you look at this question, it's twofold. Number one is what can the individual do for themselves? And number two, what can the wider community do for converts who experience this situation? For the converts themselves, something that I always advise converts who have a similar situation as this is not to think that their experience is only an isolated incident upon themselves that they're experiencing, and say to them that the converts who came before us have actually experienced a similar situation, and you can find different converts around us who experience a similar situation as well. And even at the time of when you look at the Prophet Muhammad during his time, when people were embracing Islam, they experienced challenges at that time as well. And even for myself, sometimes, but not always, I do disclose my journey to converts just to show them that in terms of the severity of what they're going through is not actually that severe in comparison to other people. But does need to be some sort of mediation service by the wider community, whether it's a masjid or a convert organization, that they can actually converts themselves can actually go to and say, look, my family, I would really love to be with them, except they don't understand. So some sort of mediation service would be quite nice if the different organizations and masjids could actually establish. And obviously having that social support around this particular individual, advising them what you can have in terms of, that whether it's emotional support, is quite useful as well. There is another part in terms of help that we need to get, we need to address, is in terms of emergency temporary accommodation as well. For example, like in incidences like me, where we'll be physically abused, it does happen. I do know many cases within, the brown convert community where it does happen, as well as some cases in the white and black communities as well, that people are chucked out onto the streets literally, and often physically abused. But what do we do?
I have to say, I'm overwhelmed by what you've been through, AbdulMaalik. It's just it's very clear to me that the community is failing an entire segment of our convert community, and we really need to pull our socks up on that. Andrea, let's ask you now. So
well, I think the question that you asked Abdul Malik, that he answered so broadly, was about being disowned and the problems with presumably your parents, your family, and what have you. And yes, my experience was very positive. There were bits where I'm actually not allowed to take halal meat into family gatherings because apparently it's cruel. That's fine. I'll take a vegetarian dish. All done. And obviously I'm not going to eat their meat anyway, am I? So it's all done. There's one of my birth sisters who carries on like that, and she doesn't like me wearing my scarf, but she's bought me winter gifts. We can guess what they were used to be called. Winter gifts of scarves for about 3 years now. So those have come round. So she has any animosity towards me, it's mild, shall we say, from what I'm listening to, it's mild. But the problem for me about her problems, in a mild manner, is it's her problem. And I think she's dealt with her problem, fair enough. It's her house, she doesn't want halal meat in it. Fine, that's great. So when it comes to bigger issues and intolerance, it does make me wonder how intolerant parents or people who disown their children, if they'd have gone home and said they were vegetarians, gay, going out with an outlaw biker or somebody that are out of their culture, would these people still be that intolerant? So as well as going home and saying that you've become a Muslim, I think it's a whole human issue whereby there's lovely humans everywhere and they're not all Muslim. And so say it was my mum or dad, I would be looking within their community, not mine, for people to soften it for them, because it's their problem, not mine. I'm not going to change for them. They can carry on all they like. I'm not. It's not going to make me not a Muslim. I'm very happy to work with you, with work, with my friends, to slot in where I can. That there's ways of doing all this which can allow people see that you are you, that you are still you. That, to be fair, I didn't drink alcohol all this century. So anybody who knew me before I became Muslim knew I didn't drink, although I'd sit in there if that's where other people were. But that would be in a mumsy way. So for me, I think if it's the parents and the family that are having the problem, it's them that need the help. And so, yes, if you've been disowned and can't get back in these other cases, but if it's not quite as severe as that, and you're still allowed into the home, do your best to make that positive, carrying on as normal as you can be in a halal way. And the thing I do with my children, who are all adults and absolutely fine anyway, but if there's ever an opportunity to say, actually, that's in Islam, I always say it. I always say, do you know, that's actually in the Quran. Do you know the Prophet, peace be upon him, did that. That's it. I don't want, I'm not creating an argument. I'm just saying that's in Islam, that's in Islam, just like that all the time. And then, of course, as we all should be doing, it's about our character, the way we're being, our softness, our forgiving, our patience.
What you're talking about is finding allies. Obviously, we want to try and break those barriers. We want to try and find allies and to get our point across. But in the case of abuse, no, we have to put boundaries. And I think that that's important because, as AbdulMaalik brought up at the start when he was talking about this and the abuse that he received from his parents, subhanAllah, the thing that had been told to him was that you can't even say uff to your parents. And this kind of misinformation, it is true in the Quran, you don't disrespect your parents, but that doesn't mean that you tolerate abuse from them. And I've seen, not just from Brother AbdulMaalik's story, but I've seen so many other stories of converts being told things about how we're meant to treat family members, how we're meant to treat our parents, how we're meant to respect our husbands, and so on and so forth, which is in effect instructing us to put up with abusive situations, which isn't what Islam actually teaches us. And so what Brother AbdulMaalik Taylor as well was talking about, having some sort of organization that can mediate between converts and their birth families. They need to have this understanding as well, of how to safeguard the new Muslim in abusive situations. One thing that has always surprised me is, for example, in the case of when brothers or sisters are leaving marriages because of abuse, and they're going for mediation about custody of children. And if you go through a legal channel, the solicitors would tell you there is no mediation in domestic violence situations. You get the law, you get the court order, and whoever breaks the court order, you get it back to court and so on, because they know that mediation doesn't work in abusive situations. Mediation is for the people who are following, who just the relationship is broken down, but it hasn't degenerated into abuse. And so I think that any sort of organizational help that we could get, they need to be aware of this as well, that we can have mediation up to a point, but if there is abuse going on, there absolutely has to be priority to safeguard the person who is being attacked. And so I'm glad that you've brought that up.
And also to safeguard the children within that.
Absolutely, yes, of course.
It would not be correct to give them to somebody so volatile anyway, to the abuser, if you like.
Yes,
you
of course,
it's a done deal, isn't it? The children aren't going to go to the abuser.
Can I just add to that? It's interesting actually, because the points are really, really good points, because at the end of the day, yes, that it would be amazing if there was some kind of organization that, I'm just thinking out loud here, so humor me and whatnot. Yes, it would be fantastic if there was some kind of organization to kind of mediate. I myself was disowned by my own dad for about 8 years. Alhamdulillah, by a miracle that changed. He's actually super happy now. I've moved back to South Wales. A couple of points, some of the most severe cases I have learnt of have actually been from the Hindu and ex-Hindu, or from the Hindu Sikh community toward their towards new Muslim converts from that community. To the point where most of them have been violent. And I'm not exaggerating. So I kind of, there's a few people I can think of. So the question arises, ironically, when I say this, and maybe I sound a bit daft, but even with organizations, they would have to safeguard themselves going to these families to try and mediate. So that's another thing to think of as well. How do they keep themselves safe, So that's something to think of. Although, again, the idea within itself as a concept is great. And the thing is as well, sometimes it takes many years, and it can happen. It could take many years, as in my case, for example, and other people's cases, where families do come around, alhamdulillah, and they do start to accept the conversion. But having said that, the disownmentship, is that even a word? The disowning can have its toll on some converts, to the point where it starts to affect their mental health, and they can even start to blame themselves, and they can become really down and depressed. And I just wanted to ask you both, how do you advise a new Muslim brother or sister who's in this position? How do you advise somebody in that position?
I always think that, if you yourself are struggling, can't quite get yourself right, get yourself settled, you're upset, go and help somebody else. You'll be making connections in a way whereby you're helping and you will build better, firmer, warmer relationships. Whoever you're, if you're volunteering at food banks or whatever it is. And I guess just because my experience isn't anywhere near that of these people, I can only think of, firstly, gosh, keeping yourself safe. Choose your battles wisely. And I know all I do is take it right back to Islam and protect yourself, fear Allah only, be the best character you can be, patience and forgiveness. You've tied your camel.
Absolutely. Brother AbdulMaalik, how about yourself with some advice for those who are listening in terms of the impact on mental health and how they can tackle these issues?
Just like to stress one's mental health is important. And I think sometimes we do underlook it. We perhaps look at physical abuse a lot more, but that mental health is always there, and we do need to address it. And I think from the experiences that I've had liaising with other converts who are saying they've got just too much on their head, they don't even see it as a mental health. And I do say to them, look, you perhaps need some time out and perhaps just concentrate on yourself. And, sometimes they inform me that we can't do X, Y, and Z in Islam. And I said to them, look, okay, then that's going to be quite natural for a lot of us, even if we are not a convert as well, that perhaps we do need to pace ourselves in terms of our Islamic practices we're doing. As long as we're fulfilling the obligations as a bare minimum, that's okay. The FUD prayers, that's fine. Even if you can't get, do your sunnah prayers, but you keep them to your obligatory prayers, that's fine. And, sometimes they say we can't get up for Fajr. I said, well, there's been days I've not got up for Fajr either. I've just slept through it. And, that's, if I even tell them that piece, they're like, oh, okay. But, it's trying to convince them that you can seek help and not the approach will not be the same. The advice you give to each of the converts will not be the same because each advice will be specific to that person. And the other thing is something that I do advise converts as well as non-converts is to realize that perhaps somebody is weak in their deen and not necessarily left the fold of Islam. Whatever the individual's need is has to be properly looked at. For some people, being even like in a game of football could be the part where they can let out that mental stress as well. That could be what person's source, but another person could be they want somebody there on an ongoing basis where they can speak about the stress they have as well.
So like something like a buddy system or befriending system?
Yeah, a buddy system.
Yeah.
So New Beginnings is running such a system, actually. And because of lockdown, it is all online, it is all virtual, so it doesn't matter. Sometimes in your own location, it can be difficult to find somebody. But because now we're all, at home, online, accessing everything online, this is now available online. So if you are interested in taking advantage of such a program and finding a buddy to help you through whatever difficulties you're having, you can find this with New Beginnings. The website is beginnings.org.uk. If you just go onto the website, look for the buddy system, you can contact them there, inshallah.
Unfortunately, we have reached the end of today's episode, but I just want to say those final remarks from both of you are absolutely fantastic. I'm sure, you've given us and our listeners something to think about. And I want to make dua for both of you, especially you, Brother AbdulMaalik. May Allah soften your family's hearts. May they come to you with love and open arms instead of hostilities and negative words. And I hope and pray that for every other convert in a similar situation as well, that I wanted to share my experience earlier because there is hope. Families do come around, keep making dua and don't give up. And as Sister Andrea said as well, if you are in a close locality, whereas for me, I was about 150 miles or so away. If you are in close locality, do try to, as best as you can, because I know it's hard. My God, I know it's hard. And the ego's telling you, why I should bother. But try your best and show good character. And once again, may Allah soften everyone's hearts and may Allah guide our families to Islam. Ameen.
Ameen.
Ameen, Ya Rab. And I'd like to add to that, may Allah reward our brothers and sisters who are going through these struggles. these are tests from Allah. Allah tests all of us when we come to Islam. It's a way of Him strengthening us, and may Allah strengthen us and keep us firm on our faith and reward those of us who are going through these awful tests. And may He make us excellent examples of good Muslims through our manners and our speech to our loved ones. Ameen ya Rab.
Ameen. Ameen. Ameen.
Jazakallah khair to you both for coming on. That brings us to the end of our episode. Salaam alaikum.
Thank you all for listening. Would love to hear your feedback. So if you have any comments, questions, or requests for topics of discussion, please feel free to drop us an email on unplugged@beginnings.org.uk, and be sure to hit the subscribe button. So for now, this is Aisha.
And this is Amanda.
And this has been Converts Unplugged.
Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.